The cold glow of the laptop screen is the only light in the room, and it feels like an interrogation lamp I've turned on myself. Each line on the spreadsheet, each transaction is a tiny, digital stab. And then I see it. A name I don't recognize. A recurring payment. Large. Too large for a casual expense. The description simply says, property management, my blood doesn't run cold. It freezes. It just stops. The air in my lungs turns to ice. This isn't a bill I know. This isn't a payment we make. The mouse hovers, trembling under my fingertip, as if it, too, is afraid of what clicking might confirm. But I have to know. I click. An address I've never seen. A part of town Mark never mentions. A name, a woman's name, listed as the primary tenant contact on a barely visible, accidentally attached invoice fragment from months ago. My breath catches. The world tilts. This isn't just a mistake. This is a monument to a lie. If you've ever felt that sickening lurch in your stomach, that moment where the floor vanishes from beneath your feet, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. And if this story already resonates with you, please subscribe. It helps more than you can imagine to know I'm not just shouting into the void. Our life, before this moment, felt like one of those perfectly curated Instagram feeds. Mark was the charming, ambitious husband. I was the supportive, perhaps slightly naive, wife. We had the nice house in the suburbs, the 2 cars, the annual vacation plans meticulously charted on a shared calendar. We were, by all outward appearances, disgustingly happy. Or, at least, comfortably content. My inheritance, a gift from my late grandmother, was our safety net, our dream fuel. She'd always told me, Eleanor, this is for your sunshine, not just rainy days. Build something beautiful with it. We talked about it, Mark and I, renovating the creaky old farmhouse on the edge of town, maybe starting a small business, a little bookstore cafe I'd always dreamed of. He'd nod, his eyes crinkling at the corners, full of what I thought was shared enthusiasm. Whatever you want, Ellie. It's your future. Our future. That's what he'd said. His voice, a warm, reassuring hum that could make any doubt dissolve. The inheritance wasn't a king's ransom, but it was significant. Enough to change the trajectory of a life, if used wisely. Enough to feel secure. Mark, with his finance background, had offered to manage it. Let it grow, Ellie, he'd advised, his tone serious, responsible. We'll put it in a high-yield, low-risk fund. Let it work for us while we plan. It sounded sensible. Adult. I trusted him. Implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, my partner, the man who held my hand a little tighter when we crossed the street, who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who whispered, I love you, in the dark before sleep claimed us. Or so I believed. The money, my grandmother's legacy, sat in an account he'd set up, supposedly accruing interest, waiting for that perfect moment, that perfect project. I rarely checked it. He'd give me updates, printouts showing steady, if unspectacular, growth. See? Doing just fine, honey. Safe and sound, safe and sound. The words echo now, hollow and mocking. Life was a rhythm of work, dinners, weekend errands, planning for a future that seemed solid, tangible. We'd browse paint swatches for the farmhouse kitchen, debate the merits of slate versus granite countertops. He'd talk about the garden he wanted to plant, the fruit trees. I'd imagine shelves filled with books, the aroma of coffee and baking bread. These were the bricks of our shared dream, laid one by one, or so I thought. He was always busy, of course. Work's crazy, he'd say, kissing my forehead before rushing off, or staying late at the office. I understood. Ambition was part of his charm, part of what I'd loved. I'd make dinner, eat alone sometimes, telling myself it was temporary, the price of success, of building that future. The occasional canceled date night, the preoccupied silences during dinner, I'd brush them off. Stress. Pressure. Normal marriage stuff. Everyone has phases. I was patient. I was understanding. I was a fool. The first tremor, the tiny crack in the facade, was so small I almost missed it. A misplaced credit card statement, tucked into his gym bag. I was looking for a pen. An odd charge at a florist I didn't recognize, one across town. Oh, that, he'd said a little too quickly when I'd idly asked. For Mrs. Henderson in accounting. Her cat died. Office whip round. It sounded plausible. A little elaborate for an office whip round, but plausible. I filed it away. Then there were the phone calls he'd taken in the other room, his voice dropping to a murmur. Work stuff, he'd mouth, hand over the receiver if I walked in. The late nights became more frequent. The excuses more elaborate or sometimes more dismissive. You wouldn't understand. It's complicated. A chill started to creep into the edges of our comfortable life. A subtle draft, carrying a scent I couldn't quite place, but it made me uneasy. I started paying closer attention. Not because I was suspicious, not really. Not yet. It was more like a subconscious cataloging of inconsistencies. The way he'd angle his phone away from me. The sudden password on his laptop, which had always been open. The scent of a perfume that wasn't mine. Faint, almost imaginary, clinging to his shirt one evening. He'd laughed it off. Must have brushed past someone at the office. You know how those city elevators are, packed like sardine tins, each explanation, smooth, immediate. Too smooth. Too immediate. Like lines rehearsed for a play I hadn't realized I was a character in. The real shift, the one that pushed me from vague unease to a sickening certainty, began with that spreadsheet. I'd been trying to get a clearer picture of our finances for the farmhouse renovation. Mark had been evasive, saying he had it all under control, that the special account for my inheritance was ticking along nicely. Don't worry your pretty little head about it, he'd said, a phrase that once sounded affectionate but now grated like sand in my teeth. I needed specifics. Contractors' estimates were piling up. So, late one night, when he was supposedly at a networking dinner, I decided to look myself. He usually left his laptop open. This time, it was password protected. My unease sharpened. I tried a few common passwords, birthdays, anniversaries. Nothing. Then, almost as a joke, I tried sunshine, my grandmother's word for the inheritance. It opened. My heart sank. Why that password? And there it was. Not just one spreadsheet, but several. Hidden in a folder labeled Personal Projects and in the main banking app, after some searching, I found the linked account for the inheritance. It wasn't growing. It was shrinking. Systematically. Regular, substantial withdrawals. And then, the cross-reference. The payment to Harborview Property Management, that was the thread. I pulled on it, and the entire tapestry of my marriage began to unravel before my eyes. Harborview. The name sounded bland, anonymous. A quick search online. They managed apartment buildings. Mid-range, decent, but not luxury. One of their flagship properties was a newish complex called the Cypress, in a part of town Mark had no reason to frequent. Or so I thought. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to demand answers. But a strange coldness settled over me. Grandma's voice, a calm, steady presence in my memory. Eleanor, when the storm comes, don't flail. Stand firm. Think. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking, but my mind strangely clear. I needed more than just a transaction. I needed proof. I needed to understand the scale of this betrayal before I blew our world apart. Because once I lit that fuse, there would be no going back. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy. I cooked his favorite meals, smiled at his jokes, asked about his day. Each word I spoke felt like a lie, each touch, a betrayal of myself. Inside, I was a hollow shell, echoing with the questions I couldn't ask. Who is she? How long? And the most painful one, why? He seemed oblivious, cocooned in his deceit. Or perhaps he was just that good an actor. He'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, a peck on the cheek, his eyes already distant, focused on whatever life he lived when he wasn't with me. The scent of that other perfume, I noticed it more often now, or maybe I was just attuned to it, a bloodhound tracking the spoor of my own heartbreak. I started small. I checked our joint credit card statements online. More oddities. Dinners at restaurants we'd never been to, in neighborhoods far from his office or our home. Purchases from boutiques I'd never heard of. A weekend hotel booking in a nearby city, explained away as a solo work retreat to focus on a big project. I'd believed him. I'd even packed him a little care package with his favorite snacks. The memory made me physically sick. The money from the inheritance account, the withdrawals were always just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic alert from the bank. Clever. Calculated. Each transaction a careful, deliberate theft not just of money, but of trust, of our shared future. The rising challenges felt like scaling a sheer cliff face in the dark. Every piece of evidence I found was another jagged rock tearing at my hands, my heart. I learned to be a ghost in my own home, sifting through his things when he was out, my pulse thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I found a second phone, hidden in his old briefcase in the attic. The kind you buy with cash untraceable. It was locked, of course. But the SIM card, when I prized it out and put it into my old phone, revealed a history of texts. Not many, they were clearly diligent about deleting, but enough. Pet names. Meeting arrangements. Intimate, casual. The banality of it was almost as shocking as the betrayal itself. Can't wait to see you. Running late. Save me some wine. Dreaming of last night. Each message a shard of glass in my gut. The name, Chloe, appeared frequently. Chloe. It sounded young, carefree. Everything I suddenly felt I wasn't. I put the SIM back, wiped my prints, returned the phone. My grief was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but alongside it, something else was growing. A chilling, razor-sharp anger. This wasn't just an affair. This was a systematic plunder. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was funding it with my grandmother's legacy. With the money meant for our farmhouse, for my bookstore, for our sunshine. I started to dig into Harborview property management and the Cypress online searches, public records. It was tedious, slow. I learned about property ownership, rental agreements. I felt like an amateur detective, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of injustice. The apartment at the Cypress, the one her rent was being paid for, was a one-bedroom. Nice, but not extravagant. The lease, I eventually discovered through a carefully worded, anonymous inquiry to a letting agent who sometimes worked with Harborview, was in the name of Chloe Rain. The pieces clicked into place, forming a hideous mosaic. The emotional toll was immense. I was barely sleeping. Food tasted like ash. I'd look at Mark across the dinner table, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and wonder how I could have been so blind. The gaslighting was relentless. If I even hinted at being unhappy or questioned his late nights, he'd turn it back on me. You're being paranoid, Ellie, don't you trust me? I'm working hard for us, and this is the thanks I get. He'd sigh, run a hand through his hair, looking wounded, making me feel guilty for even doubting him. There were times I almost broke, almost confronted him with the scraps of evidence I had. But Grandma's voice would whisper, "Not yet, child. Get your ducks in a row." The midpoint shift came with a sickening thud. I was tracking the withdrawals from the inheritance account, trying to see if there was a pattern beyond the rent. And then I saw it. A much larger transaction, not to Harborview, but to a different entity. Oak Knoll Developments, I'd never heard of them. This wasn't a recurring payment. It was a single, massive chunk. My blood ran cold again, colder than before, if that was possible. What was Oak Knoll Developments? My fingers flew across the keyboard. They were property developers, specializing in new builds, small, upscale townhouses and condos on the outskirts of the city. One of their recent projects was a development called Willow Creek Estates. Pictures online showed charming, modern homes, perfect starter castles. And then, the connection that made my world implode. Mark had, a few months ago, casually mentioned a fantastic investment opportunity a colleague had tipped him off to. A property flip, he'd said. Quick turnaround, high profit. He'd suggested using a portion of the inheritance. I'd been hesitant. It was for the farmhouse, for our dream. Just a small part, Ellie, he'd coaxed. It'll boost the fund significantly. We can do the farmhouse renovations even grander then. I'd eventually, reluctantly, agreed to him. Looking into it, he'd later told me the deal fell through. Too risky, he'd said, looking disappointed. Don't worry, the money's still safe, liar. The Oak Knoll payment was dated just days after that conversation. He hadn't just paid his mistress's rent. He had taken a huge slice of my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, and bought property. But for whom? The deepening crisis wasn't a loud explosion. It was a slow, suffocating implosion. I realized the Willow Creek Estate's property wasn't an investment for us. It was for them. A love nest, perhaps. Or a new life he was planning, funded by me. The sheer audacity of it, the depth of the deception, left me breathless. He wasn't just cheating. He was building an entirely separate existence on the foundations of my trust and my family's money. All my attempts to find out who legally owned this specific Willow Creek property bought via Oak Knoll hit a wall of corporate veils and privacy. He'd covered his tracks well, or so he thought. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of betrayal. Who could I talk to? My friends would be horrified, sympathetic, but they wouldn't understand the cold rage that was now my constant companion. My family? They'd want to tear Mark limb from limb, but I needed strategy, not just fury. I started to withdraw, becoming quieter, more observant. Mark noticed the change. You okay, Ellie? You seem distant, his voice, laced with that fake concern that now made my skin crawl. Just tired, I'd say. Work's been stressful. Let him think I was weak, oblivious. Let him underestimate me. That was my only advantage now. The weight of it all was crushing. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, tears silently tracing paths to my pillow, wondering if I had the strength to fight this. He was so confident, so smug in his secret world. He thought he had all the angles covered. The image of my grandmother, her kind eyes, her unwavering strength, kept me going. She hadn't raised me to be a victim. She'd given me that money for sunshine, and he was casting a permanent eclipse over my life. The thought of him enjoying that sunshine built on my pain. With her, it was unbearable. All seemed lost. He had my money, he had his mistress, he had his secret plans. What did I have? A broken heart and a rapidly dwindling bank account that wasn't even truly mine anymore. The turning point arrived not in a flash of lightning, but in a quiet moment of clarity. I was looking at a photograph of my grandmother, taken years ago. She was standing in her garden, hands on her hips, a trowel in one hand, beaming. She'd built that garden from scratch, transforming a patch of weeds into a riot of color and life. She never shied away from hard work, from getting her hands dirty. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to just reclaim the money. I was going to dismantle his entire illicit enterprise. I was going to take back my sunshine. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I researched. I found Eleanor Vance. Her first name a small, empowering coincidence. She was known for being sharp, relentless, specializing in financial fraud within complex marital disputes. Her website had testimonials that spoke of her tenacity, her ability to unravel even the most tangled webs of deceit. When I met her, she was all business, her eyes intelligent, missing nothing. I laid out everything I knew, the spreadsheets, the timelines, the second phone, the property management company, Oak Knoll Developments, Chloe Rain. I didn't cry. My voice was steady, fueled by a cold, hard resolve. She listened patiently, occasionally asking a pointed question, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, Ms. Vance leaned back in her chair. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, has been remarkably audacious. And remarkably foolish, a flicker of something that might have been dry amusement crossed her face. The use of inheritance funds is a very specific type of misappropriation, especially when there's a clear intent to defraud. The commingling with joint assets, the attempt to disguise the purpose, he's left a trail, Mrs. Peterson. A messy one, for all his attempts at cleverness. For the first time in months, a tiny spark of hope ignited within me. What can we do? I asked. "We can do a great deal," she replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "First, we freeze what's left of the inheritance account. Then, we initiate proceedings to recover the misappropriated funds. Every penny siphoned to Ms. Rain's rent, every dinner, every gift. And as for Oak Knoll developments," she paused, a slight smile playing on her lips. "Property purchased with fraudulently obtained funds, especially funds with such a clear provenance as inheritance, can be subject to a constructive trust. Essentially, Mrs. Peterson, we can argue that he wasn't buying that property for himself, but as a trustee for you." My breath hitched. "You mean?" "It means," she said, her eyes glinting, "we may be able to not just recover the monetary value, but place a lien on, or even reclaim, the Willow Creek property itself." "He used your grandmother's sunshine to build his little hideaway?" "Well, that sunshine might just burn it to the ground." The plan she outlined was meticulous, aggressive, and utterly terrifying in its potential to decimate Mark's secret life. It involved forensic accountants, private investigators to discreetly confirm occupancy of the Willow Creek property, if Chloe had already moved in, or if it was being furnished for her, and a barrage of legal filings designed to hit Mark from every angle, simultaneously. "He will be blindsided," Ms. Vance assured me. "Men like him, they operate on the assumption of their own cleverness and their partner's ignorance or passivity. We will demonstrate he is gravely miscalculated on both counts." Leaving her office that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The cold knot of grief was still there, but it was now intertwined with a fierce, almost exhilarating determination. I was no longer a victim adrift. I was a woman with a plan, an army of one, with a formidable general in Ms. Vance. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet activity. I continued to play the part of the oblivious wife, while Ms. Vance's team worked in the shadows. They confirmed Chloe Rain was indeed the sole, regular occupant of the Cypress apartment. They also discovered that the Willow Creek townhouse, purchased through Oak Knoll, was in Mark's name alone, but the down payment and subsequent furnishing costs were almost entirely sourced from my inheritance. He'd been bleeding it dry at an alarming rate. He was even, it turned out, in the process of trying to take out a second mortgage on our marital home, likely to further fund his new life, leveraging its equity based on the assumption that my inheritance was a joint safety net he could manipulate. Ms. Vance's team put an immediate stop to that application. Little fires, she called them, that we were stamping out before they could become infernos. The strategy was set. First, the eviction notice for Chloe Rain from the Cypress apartment. Harborview Property Management, once presented with irrefutable proof by Ms. Vance that their rent was being paid with fraudulently obtained funds and the implicit threat of being named in a larger lawsuit, were surprisingly quick to cooperate. They wanted no part of Mark's mess. The lease would be terminated due to fraudulent representation of payment source. Chloe would have minimal notice to vacate, as per the emergency clauses in her lease regarding illegal financial activity. Simultaneously, a formal legal notice of financial malfeasance, a demand for full restitution of inheritance funds, and a lease pendens, a notice of pending legal action, would be filed against the Willow Creek property, effectively freezing his ability to sell it, borrow against it, or transfer ownership. And finally, a devastating letter would be delivered to Mark, detailing every single accusation, every piece of evidence, and the full scope of the legal actions being taken. The day arrived. D-Day, I called it in my head. I felt strangely calm, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. Ms. Vance had timed everything with military precision. The eviction notice was scheduled for delivery to Chloe Rain at the Cypress at 10 a.m. The legal papers for Mark were to be couriered to his office at 10:15 a.m. The lease pendens on Willow Creek would be filed electronically at 10:05 a.m. I was at home, ostensibly working on a freelance project, the phone on the table beside me, silent. The building held its breath. The clock ticked with agonizing slowness. At 10:03 a.m., my burner phone, one I bought for secure communication with Ms. Vance, buzzed. A single text from her. Cypress notice served. Tenant is distressed. A grim satisfaction settled in me. Distressed. Good. Then, The wait for Mark's reaction. I imagined him in his glass-walled office, exuding confidence, probably charming some client or barking orders at a subordinate. The courier would arrive. He'd sign for the package, annoyed at the interruption. He'd open it, expecting some dull contract. And then his world would shatter. The silence in my own house was deafening. I made myself a cup of tea, my hand steady, the calm before his storm. At 10:28 a.m., my regular phone, the one he knew, exploded into life. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th ring, I answered, my voice deliberately mild. Hello. Eleanor. His voice was raw, ragged, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was pure, unadulterated panic. What the hell is going on? I got these papers from some lawyer. What is this? Is this some kind of joke? No, Mark, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. It's not a joke. It's a reckoning. A reckoning? What are you talking about? They're making insane accusations. About money, about property. And Chloe just called me hysterical. She's being evicted. They're throwing her out on the street. What did you do, Eleanor? The use of her first name, so casual, so proprietary, even now, sent a fresh stab of pain through me, quickly cauterized by icy rage. What did I do, Mark? I think the question is, what did you do? With my grandmother's inheritance. With our marriage. With the last 5 years of my life. There was a choked sound on the other end. You can't do this. That money, it was for us. The Willow Creek place, that was an investment. For our future. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Our future, Mark? Or yours and Chloe's? The one you were building with my money, behind my back? The one where you planned to leave me with nothing but debts and a broken heart while you played house in a property bought with funds you stole? Stole? That's slander. It was a misunderstanding. We can sort this out, Ellie, please. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. His voice was cracking now, desperation seeping through. The confident, charming Mark was gone, replaced by a whining, cornered animal. You threw everything away, Mark, I said, the words falling like chips of ice. When you decided my grandmother's legacy was your personal slush fund. When you decided your vows to me were optional, I could hear him pacing, his breath coming in harsh gasps. The eviction is happening, Mark. Chloe will have to find somewhere else to live, presumably with her own money this time. And as for Willow Creek, that property, the one you bought with my inheritance, it now has a very large, very legal claim against it. My claim. You won't be selling it. You won't be living in it. You might, in fact, end up losing it entirely to repay what you took. And then came the sound I'd unknowingly been waiting for, the sound that the title of this chapter of my life would be written around. A scream. Not a shout of anger, but a raw, tearing sound of utter devastation, of a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble into dust around him. It was the sound of his arrogance shattering, his schemes collapsing. No. You can't. That house, that was everything. He wasn't just screaming about the house. He was screaming about the exposure, the loss of control, the public humiliation of his affair being dragged into the light, his financial maneuvering revealed as theft. He was screaming because his mistress was homeless and his dream house was no longer his. He was screaming because he'd been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly, comprehensively defeated by the wife he'd so clearly underestimated. Yes, Mark, I said softly into his tirade, though I doubted he could even hear me over his own meltdown. I can. And I could hear things crashing in the background. Furniture? His meticulously organized desk accessories? The lawyer has all the details, Mark. I suggest you get one of your own. You're going to need him. And then, with a click that felt more final than any divorce decree could, I hung up. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of his broken rage and the quiet, steely satisfaction of my victory. He had pointed the gun of betrayal at me, but somehow, in the end, he was the one who'd pulled the trigger on himself, with my steady hand guiding his. The aftermath was messy, as all demolitions are. Mark tried everything. Threats, begging, attempts to manipulate mutual friends, even a ludicrously theatrical apology delivered on my doorstep, flowers wilting in his fist. I watched him, a detached observer, seeing not the man I'd loved, but a desperate stranger whose mask had been ripped away. Ms. Vance handled it all with cool professionalism, a shield between his flailing and my newfound peace. The legal battle was protracted, but the evidence was overwhelming. He'd been so arrogant, so sure of his cleverness, that he'd left a trail of digital breadcrumbs a mile wide. The inheritance money siphoned for Chloe's rent, the lavish gifts, the secret weekends, it was all documented, all traced back. We recovered a significant portion of it. Chloe Rain vanished, a footnote in the sordid tale, her eviction from the Cypress a swift and ignominious end to her role in his charade. I never saw her, never wanted to. She was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was Mark's deceit, his profound disrespect. The Willow Creek townhouse, his intended palace for his new life, became the centerpiece of the settlement. Ms. Vance, true to her word, had argued successfully that it was purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. It didn't become mine outright, that would have been too complex, but its value was heavily leveraged to ensure I received not just what he'd stolen, but significant damages and a larger share of our other marital assets, given his egregious financial misconduct and the attempted fraud with the second mortgage on our home. He was forced to sell it under duress, the proceeds largely coming to me. He lost his secret house, his secret lover, and a very public shred of his reputation as his carefully curated image of the successful, devoted husband disintegrated. He didn't just lose the money. He lost the future he'd tried to steal. Our divorce was finalized with a quiet click of a judge's gavel, not the dramatic courtroom showdowns you see in movies. By then, Mark was a shadow of his former self, humbled, bitter, but ultimately powerless. He had to sell our marital home to afford the settlement and his own legal fees, moving into a small, soulless apartment across town, a far cry from the Willow Creek estate's dream. Karma, I suppose, has a grim sense of humor. For me, life began anew. The money, or what was recovered and awarded, went into a trust, managed by people I chose, people I could truly trust. I didn't buy the old farmhouse. The dream felt tainted, a relic of a life built on lies. Instead, I found a smaller place, a cottage with a little garden just for me. And yes, I started that bookstore cafe. A smaller, more intimate version than the grand one I'd imagined with Mark, but it was mine. Built with my own hands, my own renewed spirit, and the legacy my grandmother truly intended for my sunshine. It's a quiet place, filled with the scent of old paper and fresh coffee, a haven. There are still days when a shadow of the betrayal falls over me, a phantom ache for the life I thought I had. Trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered, painstakingly rebuilt. But those days are fewer now. More often, I feel a sense of quiet strength, a resilience I didn't know I possessed until I was tested to my core. I learned that I am stronger than I thought, more capable than I ever imagined. I learned that sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound liberations. He screamed when the lawyer evicted them, metaphorically and literally, from the life he'd built on my foundations. And in the ringing silence that followed his downfall, I finally heard my own voice again, clear and strong. Thanks for being here, for listening to my story. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life, and honestly, it means the world. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your strength in the rubble of a broken trust, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Your stories remind me, and all of us, that we're not alone.